Will Canada go to war with Russia? Canada doesn't do war footing, not really. Not since the Cold War ended. But right now, quietly, without a declaration and without a single shot fired, Canada is rebuilding its military for a fight it hopes never happens, a fight with Russia, new submarines, a new NATO command role in the Baltics, tens of billions of dollars, a defense chief telling reporters point blank that the world has changed and the country needs a different military.
Biggest security threats for Canada?
It's a threat that is multifaceted. It is never just about one, but we are, of course, from a military perspective, we are watching very closely the new development in missile technologies. So from a military perspective, these, I think, are the most obvious one for Canada, but we can never forget everything else that needs to be addressed in a multidisciplinary fashion.
This isn't posturing. This is a strategic shift, and today we're breaking down exactly what's happening, why it's happening now, and what it actually means. Let's start with the word that changes everything: adversary. For most of the last 30 years, Canadian defense planning treated Russia as a difficult neighbor, someone to manage, not someone to fight. That's over. Ottawa's defense establishment now speaks openly about Russia as a direct adversary, a state actively working against Canadian and allied interests, not a rival to be quietly contained through diplomacy alone. That's a massive shift in framing. Government planning documents now talk about deterring adversaries with credible defense capabilities, and defense experts inside and outside government say Canada has to assume it's already in a period of strategic competition, even conflict with Moscow, whether Canadians feel that in their daily lives or not. Why? Geography used to be Canada's shield. 2 oceans, one friendly superpower to the south, and the Arctic Ocean as a natural moat. That moat is melting, literally and figuratively. Russia is investing heavily in hypersonic missiles, nuclear-powered submarines, and long-range bombers capable of threatening North America through the Arctic. One security analyst put it bluntly: on a good day, Canada can put about 8 fighter jets, 3 frigates, and 1 submarine into an area larger than all of continental Europe. That's the gap Ottawa is racing to close. And it's not just about hardware, it's about mindset. For decades, Canadian defense planning was built around expeditionary missions, sending troops somewhere else in the world to help stabilize a conflict. Now the planning has flipped toward continental and territorial defense, protecting Canadian soil, Canadian waters, and Canadian airspace directly. That's a fundamentally different posture, and it's one Canada hasn't needed since the height of the Cold War, when NORAD was built specifically to watch for a Soviet bomber and missile threat coming over the pole. The person tasked with closing that gap is General Jenny Carignan, Canada's first female chief of the defense staff, a combat engineer by training who has served in the Balkans, the Golan Heights, Afghanistan, and Iraq. In an interview with Sky News, she said it plainly: the world has changed and Canada has to get ready for large-scale, more conventional conflicts. That means a different kind of military than the one built for counterinsurgency missions in Afghanistan: air defense systems, undersea sensors, space-based surveillance, and a force that can actually defend Canadian territory, not just project power abroad. Carignan has pointed to Russian and North Korean missile development as the primary threats she tracks. She's also floated something Canada hasn't seriously discussed in generations: a supplementary reserve, potentially hundreds of thousands of civilians with basic training, essentially a strategic reserve for the country in the event of a large-scale crisis, military or otherwise.
So Sweden is less than 6 million inhabitants, and they are, of course, organized based on their geography and the threat that they have. In Canada, with 41 million population, I think we have a great pool of great Canadians that will come on a volunteer basis. And back to the theme of democracies, the strength of a democratic system is having a voluntary force that does show up for service. And I think what will happen is an offering of a broad range of different skills and talent that we need. And we will need that in many, many communities across Canada. And that talent is all there.
She's estimated that Canada has roughly 5 years to get ready. This isn't just about the Arctic anymore either. Canada just agreed to become a co-framework nation alongside Denmark and Latvia for NATO's multinational division North, bolstering command and control for NATO forces defending the alliance's eastern flank in the Baltics. Translation: Canadian officers will now help run part of the actual defensive structure standing between Russia and NATO territory. Carignan-Varadkar's stature within the alliance has grown alongside Canada's new posture too. Ottawa has put her forward as its nominee to chair the NATO Military Committee, the alliance's most senior military role and the top military advisor to the NATO Secretary General. Whether or not she wins that vote later this year, the nomination itself signals how seriously Canada now wants to be taken as a serious defense partner, not a country that talks big and under-delivers, which has frankly been its NATO reputation for years. None of this happens without money, and Canada is spending like it hasn't since the Berlin Wall came down. For years, Canada was NATO's laggard, chronically missing the alliance's 2% of GDP spending target. That changed this year. Canada finally crossed that threshold, boosted by a multi-billion-dollar spending surge. But 2% isn't the real target anymore. NATO leaders have agreed to a new benchmark of 5% of GDP by 2035, split between direct military spending and broader defense infrastructure. Prime Minister Mark Carney has said hitting that number could eventually cost the federal treasury roughly $150 billion a year. Where's it going? A NATO start, or even one it expects to fight alone? This is a deterrent strategy, not an invasion plan, and it rests on three pillars. First, alliances. Canada's entire posture is built around interlocking partnerships: NATO, the multinational division North, Operation Reassurance in Latvia, and a growing interest in joining the Joint Expeditionary Force, a flexible coalition led by the UK involving Nordic and Baltic nations. The logic is simple. A Russia weighing aggression against one member of a tightly integrated alliance has to weigh aggression against all of them. Second, financial pressure. Sanctions, export controls, and now this new defense financing bank are all tools designed to raise the economic cost of aggression without firing a shot. Canada has leaned hard into this lane since 2022, treating economic statecraft as every bit as important as tanks and jets. Third, regional deterrence, especially in the Arctic. Canada's icebreaker fleet, satellite surveillance investments, Ranger patrols, and NORAD modernization are all about making the North too well defended and too well monitored to be worth testing. As one Arctic security expert put it, the goal isn't to prepare to fight a war up there, it's to make the cost of trying so high that no one ever does. Is everyone convinced this is working fast enough? No. Critics, including some retired officers, argue Canada has been slow, that lessons from the war in Ukraine around drone warfare and air defense should have driven investment years earlier. There's also real political tension bubbling under the surface. Allies, including the United States, have pushed Canada hard on turning big promises into concrete, funded plans, and Ottawa faces its own version of the fiscal reckoning that has already toppled a government in the UK over defence spending disputes. It's also worth being honest about what this strategy is not. Canada isn't building an offensive force designed to strike first, and officials aren't talking about direct combat with Russian forces as a likely scenario. What they're describing is a layered system of deterrence: make the alliance strong enough, make the economic consequences painful enough, and make the North American and Arctic approaches defended well enough that aggression simply isn't worth attempting. It's a strategy built on prevention, not confrontation. So, where does that leave things? Canada isn't marching toward a fight, it's trying to make sure it never has to have one, by rebuilding a military that atrophied for decades, tying itself more tightly to allies who show a new submarine fleet built with the German manufacturer TKMS, what's described as the world's second largest fleet of icebreakers. An $800 million missile contract with Norway's Kongsberg to arm future F-35 fighters, a fast-tracked rifle upgrade for soldiers, and a $6.6 billion defense industrial strategy designed to build up Canadian weapons manufacturers so the country isn't entirely dependent on buying from allies. Canada is even trying to lead on the financial side of deterrence, spearheading a new multilateral institution called the Defense, Security and Resilience Bank, designed to mobilize private capital quickly for defense and security needs across allied countries. It's a Canadian-led project, with Canada set to host its headquarters. Ottawa also extended Operation Reassurance, Canada's leadership of the multinational brigade stationed in Latvia, through 2031, growing troop levels from around 2,200 to roughly 2,600 soldiers. And Canada has committed over $25 billion in total assistance to Ukraine since 2022, including more than $8.5 billion specifically in military aid, ammunition, armored vehicles, engineering equipment, all flowing toward a country Ottawa sees as the front line against the same adversary it's now preparing to deter closer to home. None of this is cheap, and none of it is simple politics either. Last year's federal budget alone earmarked $81.8 billion for the Defense Department, with billions more layered on through individual procurement announcements at events like the NATO summit in Ankara. Recruitment numbers are climbing too. Carney has pointed to rising interest in military service as a sign that public appetite is shifting alongside government policy, even if the institutional capacity actually to spend and deliver on all these commitments remains an open question. Here's the part that matters most, and the part that gets lost in the headlines. Canada is not preparing for a war. It intends to re-evaluate threat assessment and using economic and diplomatic tools alongside hard power. Whether that's fast enough, funded enough, or convincing enough to actually deter Moscow is the question that will define Canadian defense policy for the next decade. What's not in question is the direction. Canada has decided the era of coasting on geography and goodwill is over. If you found this breakdown useful, hit subscribe. We're tracking this story as it develops, from NATO summits to defense budgets to what it actually means for Canadians. Drop a comment. Do you think Canada is moving fast enough? See you in the next one.